now the movie is starting once more. This is part 2, and this is a presentation on the selection process of the best practices, and it is the second part of the first presentation that we had on the survey results. Okay, so we'll take it from there. The contents of this presentation are 6, and we'll try to be a bit fast. And we'll start with few buzzwords, then the feedback that we have got a few days ago in a workshop for consultation on, or the exposition actually of survey results. And then this is the main bulk and the main purpose of our presentation today. Third part is the best practices selection process for round 1, which is a piloting and testing phase. We will start with accompanying toolkits that work with the selection process and other essential documents that you may be needing as a selection committee. And we will go through a set of tasks in order to perform the selection of best practices. And in the 6th section, we'll go through the time plan and next steps, and finally the Q&A. Okay, I would like to start this presentation with few catchwords that came actually as a result of the January 16th and 17th early this year from the participants of the workshop who engaged IEA in-house staff as well as counterparts. The emphasized words and concepts by then is to have a transparent selection process and to ensure that it is neutral and independent, and there is a common understanding on the principles on how the selection process will be taking place. After then, a second event that happened a couple of days ago was a workshop to expose the survey results for the 40 submitted best practices so far in round 1. And the comments that we have got were quite interesting, and the presentation, the participants were very much engaged. Their most important comments are 6. The first is the number of submissions reviewed by each best practices selection committee member should be manageable in size. And actually the entire submission is 40, which is quite manageable. The second point and remark was a selection committee will need to physically meet after performing the independent assessment in order to validate and verify the selection of the top rated best practices. The third is an aspect of neutrality, again, which was mentioned in the previous slide, and it has to do with the anonymity of the submissions while the selection committee members for best practices are assessing the candidates. And the fourth, to ensure that the steering committee, the selection committee, the best practices selection committee is balanced and involving representatives on the side of counterparts, or actually from the field, independent experts, and is gender balanced. The fifth comment is to have the contact information of the submitters of the best practices to be shared to enhance learning and hence to generate an active community of practice. And the final comment that was raised, which we hope it will be possible in the phase of sustenance of the best practices mechanism, is to find some platforms, and they have to be user-friendly and possibly using IT techniques in order to facilitate the future phases of best practices exchange and extraction. Okay, now we're moving to the third part of the presentation, the selection process phases. And as we said, we need a set of documents in hand in order to complete the selection process. The first important accompanying toolkits that is needed by the Best Practice Selection Committee is a document that we will make available, TCQS will be making available on selection process guidelines. The second is the independent assessment report, and the third would be the consolidated or collated assessment report. The other set of documents that the selection committee may like to browse, just as for reference, just as a reminder, we at TCQS, we all understand that you've been engaged in developing the process itself, but however, sometimes you may like to browse a document here or there, the other essential toolkits that will be made available and accessible to you at any point in time is the Best Practices Survey Guidelines, the survey questionnaire itself in blank format, and the core of best practices paper for the design of TC projects, and the latest version of that was issued in 2011. So now we're moving to the tasks that are involved in the selection process. They are actually, we have grouped them into 5 main groupings. The first is the formation and the composition of the selection committee. The second would be the consolidation of the submissions and distribution to selection committee members. After then, the independent and neutral rating of the best practices by each individual best practices selection committee member. And follows is the meeting for validation and random checking and agreeing on the mode of announcement of the best practices. And finally, actually, it is the effective best practices announcement of the rating that has been deliberated and conceded upon by the selection committee. So how is the selection committee composed and formed? I have to reiterate again that all the selection process that we are exposing here is based on the January workshop and the principles that came within. We have generated altogether a document where the agreed principles are there. So what we are doing in here in this presentation and in the best practice selection process guidelines is elaborating the details under the main headers that you have proposed and agreed. So with the selection committee composition, we understand that in this first round we are piloting and testing, okay? So the regional directors and the directors of divisions in TC and in the technical department will be asked to nominate members of staff from their own departments, and they will be the overall number of the selection committee is 19 members as follows. The TC per region will nominate members from member states, from PMOs, from regional cooperation agreements, and all in all from TC there will be 12 members as you see in the presentation. And from the technical department we'll be asking for nominations for 4 TCLOs or TOs, 1 each from NA, NE, NS and management services. And from TCPC, TCQS, there will be 3 candidates, namely the section head, the quality management specialist, and hopefully myself will be joined. So the best practices selection committee chair will be asking for name nominations from the respective division director and regional directors. And the composition, I mean the directors will be asked to try to take into consideration aspects concerning the regional distribution, the representation and the gender and so on and so forth. and as well the best practice. Once the nominations are compiled with the focal point in TCQS, there will be some kind of electronic voting system for the choice of a chair to the selection committee and an alternate to him or her. Follows is the consolidated submission provided to the best practice selection committee members. So what is it really as selection committee members would you be getting after the selection committee is being formed? What you will get is you will get from QS, administrator and focal point, a coded set of the 40 best practices submissions, while hiding any identifying feature to ensure neutrality and independence of assessment, irrespective of region, irrespective of country, irrespective of gender, and so on. After then, the following phase will be the independent rating, and this is a key issue that you will be contributing to. You will be getting a full best practice package electronically through the facilitator and the administrator in TCQS, and it will contain 40 coded, blinded and filled questionnaires with the best practices and the survey guidelines, the core of best practices paper we have discussed before, and a blank independent assessor report. So you will do the independent rating on your own, and after then you will be scoring each case submitted on an overall score between 1 and 5 and against the quality criteria that is spelled out in the independent assessment report attached to this presentation. So after then you will be putting a date attached to each independent assessment report. You are having actually a 6 weeks period in order to complete the 40 assessments for the 40 best practices submitted. Okay, so supposedly you start in day 1 by assessing 3 cases. So please fill in the assigned place in the assessment report, the date when and where you have made your assessment. But at the end of the day, when you have completed the 40 assessments for the 40 best practices submitted, please do send them just in a single shot to the best practices administrator and focal point, so they know that you have delivered on your part. The fourth section in the fourth task in the selection process is the meeting and validation of rating and the generation of the collective assessment report. This is as well an important checkpoint in the process. There is a possibility that possibly, as we've seen from the feedback of the 7th of May workshop, that the meeting can possibly be in physical basis, physical format, where you meet in IEA headquarters, and the averages of the scores for the 40 best practices submitted is being prepared by the TCQS administrator, and they will be compiled in a single report in descending order for you to deliberate and to verify and to random check even the averages and the assessments and the selections among yourselves. At the end of the day, you're expected to have some consensus on the top 10 rated, 10 or less, while you are convening as well, you will be agreeing on the methodology by which you will be announcing as a selection committee, the best practices selection committee, the top raters. There can possibly be some kind of a joint letter that is being drafted and discussed during the meeting and proposed by the BP Selection Committee Chair to those who submitted, the top raters, the top 10 raters, and same as some kind of acknowledgement, another draft letter for those who submitted but who may not this time have gotten the top rates, and so on and so forth. So I think even we have jumped into this, we have covered this, this slide in the discussion. So maybe we move to the next, and the consolidation and the rating. Okay, and the announcement, we've been through that, and now we get to section 5 of this presentation, the proposed timetable. And it's not actually proposed, that's a mistake on my side, it is a confirmed timetable, hopefully, fingers crossed. You have agreed on this timetable last January. Under the first task, the selection committee formed an invitation sent. We're hoping that this is completed during the 3rd week of May this year. On the second task, filled, coded and blinded questionnaires received by best practices selection committee members, 4th week of May 2012. Third task, independent rating completed, end of 2nd week of June, 6 weeks. TCQS BP's administrator and focal point consolidate case-by-case results by 3rd week of June 2012. Task 4, the selection committee for best practices convenes, planned towards end of June, and same for activities like best practices, random checking validation is completed, and an immediate announcement methodology agreed among the team of the selection committee members. The final stage would be announcing the ratings by the BP's selection committee, and this is planned for in the 2nd week of July. Of course, this is not the end of story for dissemination. Announcement is something, and the further dissemination and plans for dissemination, they are planned to be taking place during the 2nd half of the year. So far we have covered the selection process, but this is not the end of story for INT 0085, organization and documentation of BP's initiative. We have reached this phase. I have extracted this slide again from part 1 of the slides. We are in the selections process. We are thinking of other different modes within the mechanism to disseminate the results of best practice and to develop the community of practices that is living, robust and continuing, sustaining into the future. As well, the mechanism itself, while we are undergoing the selection process in piloting and testing and learning phase, we have to agree on what is the ideal selection process and what have we learned from what we have been going through in the process and the engagement of stakeholders and so on and so forth. Do we have anything more, or we finished? I guess we have the final section, but we're not sure that we do have the time to cover it with you. I think it is part of the, I'm getting nods from here and there, which is interesting. Okay, so we won't be able to cover the Q&A section. However, it is available in the presentation. We'll go through it quite quickly, and it is an indispensable part of the best practice selection process guidelines, which is one of the documents that we have mentioned as an essential toolkit to this exercise. So can we just flip? We have the Q&As, cover number of essential headers, and answers are attached to them. 20 of them, essential, important, and thank you very much for your patience.